Sorry.
There we go.
And I'm Autumn Gupta, and I'm going to share my screen. If you haven't already checked out the chat, this will make it easier for you.
Yes. So we are the co-founders of Justice in June. As Autumn gets that up, for anyone that just joined, I'm throwing in the chat one more time. There's a direct link that will take you to this page. So we encourage, if you'd like to follow on, we're going to keep this super interactive. So get ready to engage, throw us questions, whether that's at the end, we'll save time for that, but also in the chat. So you'll go to this site. We recommend on a secondary device, such as a phone, a tablet, so on. You'll still be able to see our presentation following along here, but this will allow you to engage with some of the pieces. So you can either go to the direct link in the chat or joinpd.com and enter in this code. There's a quick little check on how you're feeling. You can skip that if you'd like, and then once we get a few more people in, then we'll start it and jump right in.
Yes, and a quick note with this, so I will let you know when, so again, we have all been having Zoom fatigue, we've done different presentations. Bree and I really do not want to talk at you, we want to talk with you, hence the deeper dialogue. So we'll let you know when that is, but all of your answers, when they are utilized in the Pear Deck structure, will be anonymous. So please feel free or feel more comfortable. Not that we don't already feel comfortable posting things online that we maybe shouldn't have felt comfortable posting, but yeah, again, we want to hear from you. There are no bad questions or poorly worded questions. We've seen the gamut. And just as a side note, I'm currently an 8th grade science teacher. So my main socialization is with 13 and 14-year-olds who are figuring out where their boundaries are and what is appropriate and what is not. So it takes a lot to phase me now. I have heard and seen not all of it, but a lot of it. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us started there. And full screen. Ah, beautiful. Okay, so again, welcome to our session with the deeper dialogue. We were so excited, and thank you again, Diana, for inviting us back. And Bree.
Awesome. So today we're going over social change and gap years, or honestly, any gap period, right? So we'll cover our story. Who are we? What is Justice in June? How did we get here? We'll cover finding your lane and what that looks like in the realm of looking at your gap year and then shaping your gap year. So we really want you to leave this feeling like you have a framework and a toolkit to go and make an impactful gap year or gap period of time.
Yes, and also just as a general disclaimer, we are obviously gearing that more towards our students who are interested in taking a gap year, but anyone, you can be thinking about this structure or this way of approaching as something you're going to do in your off time, your non-9 to 5. So encourage you to still find what is valuable and resonates with you for your own life, and that you don't have to be a young student taking a gap year to take the advice from this and incorporate it into your life.
So.
All right, and a quick thing that we always like to do is we like to do a pulse check. So this is also a little warm up with the Pear Deck structure. On your device, whatever you're on, you can use your mouse to circle where you're feeling with engaging in social change. Perhaps you're thinking about for your gap year, or maybe in general, how have you felt, how comfortable practicing, understanding, and engaging with social change in this very tumultuous past few months. And if you're on a touch screen, you can just draw. And so I'm going to also start showing you the beauty of the Pear Deck. So what's cool here is we can look at kind of one by one or see as those answers pop in. So you don't have to hit submit, it just automatically adds there. And if I overlay them, it's really neat because you all can kind of get a vibe of what's happening in the Zoom room. And it's also useful for me and Bree. Selfishly, we like to see where people are at so we can also try to address our audience appropriately. Which exciting, it does look like most folks are on that left-hand side towards the green, and I don't know if we want to call that like a yellowish face. And that's great. Hopefully more people, if you are more on the yellow in the middle, we can, by the end of this, have pushed you feeling more of the green, happy, comfortable growth mindset and all of that. All right, so again, we like to tell our story. We kind of call this chunk our origin story. And really, Bree, you should start this because you're the catalyst.
Yes. So Justice in June started from a conversation that stemmed from the catalyst that was the murder of George Floyd. So we saw this take place as well as several injustices leading up to that kind of was the catalyst for the surge in social justice movement. That particular incident struck a chord with me differently as someone who walks through life. I have a life to live, things to do, things to achieve. I was often desensitized to these acts of injustice. And this one hit a bit differently. And so I chose to utilize my social media at the time, which is personal and private. I wanted to put out a video basically saying, this is how someone, whether you're following me because you love me, admire me, respect me, this is someone who is tangibly affected by what's going on. And I left it very unfiltered and what put out the emotions and the different things I was feeling based on this. And so at the time, Autumn was not on social media. So I shared it with my parents and I shared it with Autumn directly. And she was like, okay, I just want to break this down. I just want to sit with you in the dark place. I can't fully understand, but I can be there alongside you and we can just talk about this.
Exactly. Because I knew after I watched, there was this one line in particular that I still remember very vividly to this day. And at the very end, Brie kind of posed this question of, if I was the one who was killed, what would you be doing different? Or would your life be affected? What would you be doing today if I was the one? If I was someone you knew, you loved, and you cared about, would your life have changed? And that was very very convicting for me, because up until that point, I had kind of been like, wow, this is horrible, saying like something must be done, but does something ever get done? Like kind of falling into the normal reaction of what you see when you just see, that wave of different events on the news. And after that, after seeing Bree's video, I was like, okay, I want to understand. I know I don't want to do what I always do when I see any of these events on the news. So I was like, hey, can we just call? I want to just hear more. And honestly, I know I can't do anything to make you feel better, but I can try to bear some of that pain as your friend. And so we did. We had a 2.5 hour conversation, which was mainly me listening and just trying to be a good friend. And after that, so this was right at the end of May. So after that, I was like, okay, I'm very type A. I have some of my mom's German in me. I like to have like check boxes. I like to have something to do. So that practical type A side of me said, okay, I know that I don't even recognize 70% of the different resources being circulated. And I'm educated and I am a person of color. And I still don't recognize a lot of these Black scholars, authors, activists who have been doing work in this space for years. And so from there, I was like, I need to just start at ground zero, which is learning for myself, educating myself kind of about the space, about the experience, and why it seems like we've made very little progress over decades. And so to do that, I've also I'm a pretty big habit person. So I was like, perfect, June is coming up. I can make a 30-day plan for how I'm going to try to nudge my needle in the direction of progress each day for 30 days consistently, and just start there. And I was creating that. I was like, okay, well, maybe I know I'm really highly motivated, so I want to spend longer each day. But maybe if I want to encourage some of my friends or like my mom, who's really busy at the time, to jump into this conversation with me, what if I made a 10-minute version? So that's kind of became the very rough basis of Justice in June, which initially was a Google Doc. And I just arranged different resources from all of the aggregations circulating into 3 structures: the 10 minutes, the 25 minutes, and the 45 minutes. And then, of course, not wanting to contribute to the problem, I was like, Bree, you are a gracious friend. You love me. And I know you can give me honest feedback on any of the things I've selected, because that's me without the Black perspective, trying to put resources together to explain or to learn more about that experience. And so she did. She had great oversight, gave some suggestions, talked about how different pieces might be interpreted incorrectly, or what would be best for someone just starting to try to understand and dig into this conversation. And so it was definitely collaborative. It was with her help. And then we both just shared it on social media. And long story short, from there, it grew and it did go viral. And I ended up reactivating an Instagram. So I was like, I don't know what to do. Bree texted me like, maybe we should make a Twitter. Someone asked if they could share it there. So that we did. We had to literally Google, like, how do you add things to Twitter? How do you reply to a thread? And I had a lot of empathy for my parents for the first time in doing something on social media that we weren't familiar with. And so again, the initial resource was just this Google Doc, where again, you can kind of see my type A color coding coming out, where I structured it daily with different resources, aggregate them in just a list if you wanted to just click directly through them, or if you wanted to look at the week spread. And then eventually that became this became a website, which we had help from all these people who said, hey, I have these skills and talents. I want to work on this. I want to help your resource be more accessible. So, oh, I don't know if you can still. Normally it doesn't open a new window, But basically, it just was the same Google Doc, just kind of put into a nicer website format, which was more accessible because the Google Doc was getting such high traffic that it wasn't built for. And we were like, cool, this makes it more accessible. It doesn't slow it down for folks that are accessing it. And it was easier for people to click directly to the different resources. So I'm going to go and pause that there. And one thing we wanted to highlight from this is Bree and I are regular, ordinary people who utilize common traits that we all have. So we wanted to emphasize to you all in the audience that you are enough to, use that cliched quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. So one of those things, I highlighted a couple, but again, strong friendships. I hope all of you have at least one person in your life who you feel such a strong friendship with. If they're your person, they get you. But that was really the basis of it. It was our conversation there. It was being willing to be vulnerable, me admitting like, I know I don't know, and I want to be better. So I can acknowledge and recognize that I hadn't been better in the past, but I was going to try to be. There's a desire to do something. So I think a lot of us have that too. We all have desires to do something to see some change. This was just a desire that we acted upon. It was Google Docs. I'm sure in the pandemic era, you all are very skilled at the Google suite of apps. So again, just using a regular thing that I'd used probably 100 times before. Goal setting, time management, utilizing social media for good to spread good news, positive news, or at least productive action, and then asking for help because we had a lot of people come to help us to help the Google Doc go to the website. And then another thing we just want to emphasize is that we are just like you. So not only are these kind of common threads or common skills that I hope people have, but we are just like you. We're very recently students. We're former students. Bree's class of 2019. I'm class of 2020. We are in our early 20s. So we are young. We have not had copious amounts of work experience or been in this space. So we are doing a lot of learning on our own. And we are starting our next chapters, that first career path, that first step after school. And so we wanted to emphasize too that to do something in the social change space doesn't mean you have to have a PhD or have decades working in it. It just means you use what you have, and that is enough.
Awesome. So we wanted to show kind of an evolution, right, of where we started, where we're at, and where we plan to go. So we began with obviously our doc that turned into our website, so justiceinjune.org, and that allowed us to get more of the traffic and actually hold it so no one could have limited access. And then in July, we partnered with an app called Snap Habit, and we took a more modular approach. So we did entirely new content for the month of July, structured it weekly with the goal of answering a question each week. And all of that content was focused around that. And that was a way to bring people on to have a collaborative piece. On August, we chose to dive into more substantial material. So we did a book club, we opened it publicly, and we held 2 sessions each Saturday to just go in and dive in and give people the tools and equip them with the framework to how do you dive into something more substantial like a book, right? More than just an article here, a video there, right? How can you take that and then move it into your habit and your daily life and routine towards allyship? And then from then on, moving into September, October, November, and so on, we've done different speaking engagements like this. We've done podcasts. We've been able to speak at corporate level, organization level, conference level with Gap Year, and be able to bring in new insight and the nuance of what does it look like to have an active anti-racist allyship journey, right? How do you navigate that? How do you tap into your own talents and resources and take your privilege or your opportunity and intersect that with where you can help someone along the way? And so now here we are getting to continue to speak. We plan to continue to build on our website, provide new resources and toolkits, and be able to help spur people towards moving this movement forward. So jumping in here, we want to paint the picture of finding your lane. I think it's really important to establish, first of all, right, that one, the allyship journey is going to look different for everyone, and it should, and everyone needs to focus and figure out what is going to work for them. We all might be in different lanes, but we're all on the same road, working towards the same end goal and same destination that honestly we shouldn't reach. We should always be progressing. And sometimes it's going to take trying different things to figure out which lane do you work best in? Where do you feel that passion? Where do you feel rejuvenated so you can avoid the compassion fatigue and burnout? And it doesn't mean that it's not going to have its challenges, or there's not going to be days where you feel like, oh, I've done so much, but it means that you're putting into something that is giving back to you as well. So we just want to highlight a few ways in which you can look and figure out what is your lane. Of course, there's the conversations, right? That's having those talks within your personal circle, your professional circle, your academic circle, right? Your friends, your families, coworkers, and so on. And being able to have those conversations and feel comfortable and confident to do so. Then there's also showing up, right? There's protesting, there's showing and utilizing, right, your voice to be able to be more active in this sphere, obviously safely with the pandemic, right? There's ways to show up. There's also social media and digital content. A lot of people, probably all of you on here, have at least one social media account, right? This is a great way to find new information as well as to spread and bring awareness maybe to works or content that others have made. And then, of course, the process of learning, unlearning, and relearning, right? That's diving into resources, right? Pushing back on our own perceptions and our biases, and then figuring out where we can go from there. And really just realizing, right, it's a step at a time. We're all working towards this goal. Sometimes the needle is going to feel like it's moved a lot, and sometimes it's going to feel like it's barely moved at all. But as long as we're moving forward and we're finding our lane, that will help us to keep this moving along. Awesome.
Sorry, I just clicked stop share instead of unmute myself. Here we go. Okay, good. And just also another note on the finding your lane, like I think Bree and I got really lucky in that we found two spaces that are very rejuvenating for both of us. And you know you're in the right lane when it excites you. And like Bree said, it refreshes you more than it takes away or drains you, like draws from your bucket. And so if you are in a lane, like let's say you've tried donating financially and you're like, that is just, I'm more stressed by donating financially because it's been a really hard year and there are people that have to make really tough decisions. Then instead of just saying, oh, well, I can't be a part, I can't be a good ally, I'm not moving along in that lane, get your blinker on, switch lanes, do some fancy driving to get out of that lane and swerve into a different one, because we don't want people to stay in a lane that isn't for them and then never get to keep moving forward quickly. We want you in a lane where you're clicking along, you feel good, and it's exciting, it is rejuvenating. So Bree and I were really lucky. We didn't have to try out too many lanes, but we've had some folks talk to us and say, oh, I'd never thought of it that way because I've tried protesting, signing petitions and posting on social media, and none of those like excited me to go further or made me see how I could be a part of the solution. So definitely get that blinker on and switch lanes if you're feeling like what you're in or what you're doing is not refreshing or rejuvenating you. And will it do that every day? For sure, no. There's going to be days when just no lane, you're just chugging along very slowly. But overall, the trend, as we like to say, should be that upward, that forward progress. And kind of that brings us into another tool to elaborate a bit more on the finding your lane. We want to highlight three main areas that we think you could best utilize that analogy in your gap year, in creating the gap year you want to have. Because you got to be active in it. You can't just passively sit back and think, oh, well, cool opportunities will come to me in this gap year. Like you are the architect of it. You get to be the creator and you have 100% control over the things you put into it. So we want to highlight three main ones: education, volunteerism, and policy. Three that we think could be interesting, and again, finding different lanes. Some might resonate more with you than others. So to start, want to talk about the education piece. Again, I mentioned I'm an 8th grade teacher. So education is really big in my life. I really love the space as a student and now on the other side as a teacher. And with this one, the main thing that I had to utilize and I'm still utilizing is that learning, unlearning, and relearning, and then the rinse and repeat cycle there. So it is looking for those genuine resources. If you know, maybe you don't want to learn overall, or you've already been along this journey since the summer, and now you're ready to dive deeper into those systemic level pieces. So you could still take one topic and maybe for a month, for a few months, your focus is going to be, oh, I want to understand the school to prison pipeline. So personally, that is one of my interests now, being in a school, seeing where that gap is happening or seeing some of my students already fall through those cracks. I'm like, this is really interesting me about the systemic nature of public school in not having all of our students graduate or not getting them all to graduation. Instead, some of them are ending up in prison instead. So that's a specific topic that I'm choosing to dive in. Again, you want to always be double checking yourself on, am I using the resources that are easy to receive? Like I don't feel challenged, or I'm like, oh yeah, I agree 100%. Or am I digging into things that are a little bit more challenging? They make me feel uncomfortable. Because to quote another person Brianna admires of, time under tension leads to growth. So you have to have that tension. Otherwise, you might not be utilizing the education piece in a way that's helping you progress along that road or in your journey. And so briefly, a how-to, really similar to how we did the Justice in June. You pick your focus, you collect materials around that focus, you can use a couple keywords, and then you just have to set up a timeline, set up a way to keep yourself accountable, and making small little micro wins, micro progress gets you to that big W, as Brie would always tell me, the big win. But you got to have little tiny W's along the way to get to the big one. And to encourage you in this, there are two fantastic ways that we've already seen people engage with this. First was that book club that Brie talked about in our timeline. We saw people dive in more and dig deeper into one longer work that did make people uncomfortable or cause them to think about things that had happened in their childhood and say, oh, I didn't realize when that happened, what was playing out, what forces were at play there. And the other one is the Facebook discussion group. So kind of a cool intersection of social media and education. This was a group that was started outside of us. We were invited to join, and then it was awesome. People just posted a resource or worked through it together and would comment their reactions, have a good dialogue in the comments on the Facebook posts. So another simple way that people chose, okay, cool, this is how I'm keeping myself accountable, picking the topic and finding a way to dig in deeper. So here's another little interactive piece we'd love to hear from you all on. What are some ideas you might have? And again, maybe education isn't the area you want to focus, but you could think about another area, social change, or how you would want to engage with that learning, unlearning, and relearning process during your gap year or in your gap time for our folks not taking a gap year. And you should be able to just type your response into whatever that secondary device is. And I'm going to give it like 10 more seconds, and you don't have to hit submit. As soon as you start typing, it'll just show up on our screen. All right, I'm going to show some of these. Oh, cool. So we've got the housing lending systems. As I have started paying my own rents, that's definitely something I'm interested in now too. I'm like, oh, this is something that is consistently taking all my paycheck. So yeah, I like that. Ooh, I like the accountability reading partner.
Having
what about you?
It's always going to be applicable.
Yeah.
Understanding where this change lands. Love that.
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you for sharing those ideas. And get ready, there'll be a couple more of those.
Awesome. So next is the lane of volunteerism, right? So looking at how you can donate, right, or give your time, your resources, your energies, and so on into this space. So one, there are so many existing organizations, charities, nonprofits, and so on that are already doing a lot of the grassroots work. So when you're looking to maybe volunteer time, right, you want to do a certain period, maybe it's not even over your entire gap year or a gap time. This is a way to just research and see what legitimate agencies are already out there existing and how can you potentially partner, right? Look at the different volunteer avenues, right? Sometimes that can be time, and obviously that looks different in COVID, but there's also still virtual volunteer opportunities. Is that, donating resources to something that gets launched? Is it amplifying? And then making those smart volunteer goals, right? You want to do more than just check a list, right? And just show up somewhere, do something, and then that's it. Look and make it specific. I want to donate 20 hours of my time to this organization so that I can move along this mission. When you do that, you're able to really track yourself and see what you've accomplished over a period of time. So the how-to here is one, of course, select your volunteer avenue. And this can be multiple things. It could be time and money. It could be resources and amplifying in your social circles or on social media, right? figure out what that avenue is, and that will help you better figure out what lanes or what groups you can connect with. And then that leads to the next step, identifying an entity to partner with, right? What route do you want to go? Or do you want to volunteer your time to something that doesn't exist? Do you want to figure out something that maybe you can create, right? It doesn't always have to be something that is existing, but that is a good place to start to maybe see best practices that you could build off on. And then lastly, establishing clear partnership guidelines. So you want to make sure that whatever you're contributing, whether it's existing or you're creating something new, are you actually furthering along the mission? Are you helping them where they need, as opposed to doing something you feel is helping the situation or contributing to the situation? And then always ask for feedback and recommendations. A lot of groups within the nonprofit and or not for profit sector have connections to other groups that are also furthering along similar missions. So this is a great way to make connections within those spaces and be able to more effectively volunteer your time, your resources, and so on. So we have a few examples here. As we said, we've done a lot of different things since June, and a few that have popped out is one, our social media graphic designer. So a lot of people were like, hey, we love what you're doing. Is there any way we can help? And one person is a young lady named Megan, and she has been doing the social media graphic design over course of a few months for us on our Instagram, on our Twitter, so on our social media pages. She took the volunteer avenue of utilizing her talent, right, her resources, to her suite and all of that to create this, and then amplification by bringing awareness to that on her own design page. She chose us to partner with, obviously, as the entity, and then made guidelines, right? We knew that we wanted to make sure that we're helping her as well. We can give recommendations. She can add this to her portfolio build. And for us, it allows, our goal was we want to have a social media with a cohesive aesthetic. We want to make sure that we're still drawing in people. We're making content that is impactful, but is also consistent. So this is an example of our feed. She's made all of these lovely graphics. And then something that we had earlier on Hot Takes with Autumn and Bree, we wanted to make that a little bit more engaging, easy to share along. So that's an example of how you can tackle the volunteer space to be able to do that. And you can, again, also incorporate a timeline into that as well. And then we will do the same thing here. So just think, what are some ideas that you have for using your gap year to dive into volunteering? So is that a grassroots collaboration, finances, time, starting your own? So we'd love to hear what you have in mind under the volunteer sphere.
And again, going back to the beginning of just like the things you can already do, the digital world that you can already navigate, how could you maybe use that or put a spin on that of things you're already good at and things that are already a part of your life to engage with social change or engage with a space that you might not have before. And the same idea, you can just type your ideas into it, into the device you're using with the Pear Deck. And I'll put some up here in just a moment. I know we're also asking you to like immediately think of some ideas after kind of giving a few examples. So no worries if you're like, oh, and this might not be your lane. You know, that's the other thing too, is this does not have to be the way you utilize your gap year time to be a part of social change or to make a difference through that. So let's see, we got some up here.
So consistent system for tithing. Love that. Supporting and it's gone. Using online platform. Yes. Working with associations to learn more about other orgs. That's a great way to do it. That's a way to start at one place and be able to build upon that research instead of maybe just casting the net wide.
Mm-hmm. And also working smarter, not harder. I always am running out of time to do the things I want to do in the day. So I'm like, cool. If this group can already make my job easier of helping channel my energies into other groups that I'm also excited to work with, then I'm going to utilize that.
Perfect.
Ooh, and I love the local issues one too. I think that's something that's been brought more to the forefront with the pandemic, keeping us more rooted in our local communities. And how can you make a difference literally in your own backyard or within oh my goodness, words are hard, within your street, something like that. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And we got one more piece.
And then the last sphere that we can also recommend is under policy. So for this one, changing it up. What questions can you ask yourself when you're looking at policy, right? So what changes do you want to see? Start there, write down everything, and then you can narrow it down into something more specific. Who are you advocating on behalf of, right? Is that maybe elderly folks who don't have access to X, right? Is it a certain lower socioeconomic group that doesn't have a resource to get a certain type of education or extracurricular, right? Figure out who you're trying to advocate on behalf of and work backwards from there. And then who are the decision makers in this realm? That's really important. I saw someone comment something similar on the volunteer piece, right? In the organizational structure, you need to know who's making the decisions when you're thinking about policy. So if you're trying to affect education discrepancies, you need to be looking at the school board, right? Who is on our school boards and our superintendents is very indicative of what type of change and policy gets put in place. You're looking at our law enforcement, right? How much of the budget goes to that? Who's the mayor and where do they side on that local, right? Local level, community level, county level, state level. So figuring out who are the decision makers in that specific area you're trying to advocate in. So how to here, one, outline your scope. And you can do multiple, but it's really great to just narrow in for the first time, especially. Look at your local community level. It's different for everyone. I live in Los Angeles, but my kind of like hub is Culver City. So my local level would be, and community level would be Culver City. My city would be Los Angeles, though, right? The larger, and then also Los Angeles County. There's also state, and then also it doesn't necessarily have to be just on our governmental level, right? There's also the workplace. There's so much policy in corporate life, in institutions, right? Such as higher education, secondary education, and so on. So figure out what scope you want to work in and then choose a focus area. So for example, is it propositions? Is it making sure that everyone in your realm understands more simply what these propositions mean, a yes or no, right? Is it voter registration? Maybe you're partner with an on the ground grassroots organization that doesn't matter how you're voting, just wants to make sure that people have access to voting. Is it speaking up and bringing issues to a council or board meeting, right? And participating in that and advocating for that. So choosing a focus area within that scope and then figure out a timeline and work backwards from there, right? We just came off of elections, and in order for people to actively make sure their voice was heard, right, then you need to be registered. If you had propositions, it was different for every state or city level. So figure out your timeline, then you can figure out what's achievable within that, and then creating checkpoints and working with task force where achievable. For example, in the workplace space, right, there's plenty of task force that exists to execute things, right? Not everyone can be doing everything. So create those checkpoints, create those key performance indicators so that you can make sure that as you're looking into this, you're growing as you go. So here's a few examples of some positive policy sections. There's when we all vote. So that was all around, again, the importance of simply voting. I am voter. This one was more on kind of the social awareness. It is kind of like a social fashion brand, had merchandise that said I am voter, just to make voting cool almost, right? We see a lot of Gen Z that were moving into voting and utilizing their voice. And this was a way to partner with celebrities, with activists, and just labeling oneself as a voter, of taking the time to go out and use their voice. In the workplace sphere, there's also inclusion and diversity councils. So I'll use this example for the breakdown of the how-to, as I do serve on my IDC within my brand. The scope here is our workplace. We were very specific to look at our brand. It's part of a larger company called Henkel. So we were specifically IDC for our brand. So looking at our workplace environment. Focus area was in an inclusive workplace and organization accountability. So that's our departments, that's our leadership, and making sure that's being infused in everything we do and everything we execute. The timeline was ongoing, but our checkpoints were on a monthly basis. So every month we get to meet with leadership to make sure we're tracking towards what we want to achieve, right? Working with other task forces within the company, other DE&I councils that are maybe larger within Henkel. So those are examples, and that's a specific example of how you can parse down to really make sure if you're looking at policy, it may seem like a lot and a lot to bite off, but if you break it down, it actually can become really achievable. And understand, especially in this scope, right? You don't have to do it alone. You can absolutely partner with other people and maybe divide and conquer to be able to reach your goals. All right. So for the last one, we want to hear some more ideas of what you have, maybe, right, for making awareness for campaigning for local measures, maybe gathering momentum through petitions, and so on in the policy sphere.
And something that we kind of thought about with this one too is like the policy, like every place has guidelines or operating procedures. Those guidelines are governing documents. So any place that follows rules or has expectations has ways that you can incorporate that accountability, like Bree said, working on her IDC. So that could be a cool way too to think about how to partner with someone and work on a policy level change that doesn't necessarily have to do with state or local or federal government. It could just be policies within a place of work, or within like a group of any kind or an activity or an organization. They all have governing documents that may or may not have any diversity, inclusion, equity language in them. So cool place to definitely get plugged in. And I'll put some of these answers up there. What's the question? Ooh, I like that someone's brought up intersectionality. Yeah, definitely. Instead of, I think sometimes for places too, their policy can get so convoluted with, well, we got to address this and this and this. And there's things that when you use the intersectionality correctly, that can help you achieve multiple different progress goals by keeping some big centralized ideas the priority and the focus.
Right. I love this one, making sure those conversations are happening in the application interviewing process. That's really great because you think about if you're onboarding someone or you're recruiting someone, right? It's great if they have a talent and skill set, but are they also passionate about championing DE&I in the workplace and in the work that they do?
Ooh, and I like the person that's putting the spin with public health. There's lots of guidelines around healthcare and health in general. So definitely, if you're interested more in that pre-med world or the medical world, healthcare world, definitely ways to affect change through policies there, through guidelines there.
Awesome. Following your own representative and senator. I think that's a great one to touch on is we have social media now. We almost have more access to some of the people that sit in office on multiple levels. This is a great way to see what they're about. What are they promoting? Who are they following and partnering with? That's such an easy way. And then obviously going in and doing more research, especially as you see campaigns come out, but being able to follow that over a longer period of time will help you gauge who you can align with and maybe where there's opportunities to work.
Awesome. So thank you again for participating in that. And one of our final ones too is just, it's also good. It's good to know what you like, what you don't like, or in how we used our analogy, which lane feels good. You're like, ooh, I think that is something I normally gravitate towards and I normally feel like really fulfilled and content in. So out of those three, we're also just curious to see, was there one in particular that resonated with folks? Or in this audience, there's one that people are like, yes, that is the thing that I could do. Awesome. All right, cool. We got some policies. So this will be like live as you pick your answer, it'll fill in.
And while you fill that in, it's also good to note, right, that these lines can absolutely blur. A great example is ourselves, right? We volunteer our time to center the conversations around educating and informing. And so that's a way to blend that. Policy can easily combine with education by taking something like propositions, for example, and making it bite-sized and being able to spread that. So think about ways too that some of this can cross over. And also, again, right, this isn't the end all be all. There's definitely more avenues, but these are some that might help you track towards how to build out an impactful gap year.
All right, and always we like to do another pulse check. We hope that at least there's a few tools or at least some new things that you learned, or we got your wheels turning on how you can utilize information or actually create that gap year experience you want, and one that can also be involved with social change and making a meaningful effort into that space as well. So again, same thing, you can use your mouse, you can use touchscreen to answer here. And you don't have to lie to us either. Like maybe you still feel like, I'm not exactly sure I want to engage, and that's totally fine too. But generally, ideally, we do see more people on that farther side, which is great because we do want you to feel that you have tools or feel capable of even using what you have now, knowing that you're enough to start making a difference, and then learning as you go. Because Brie and I have certainly learned a lot as we've gone on our journey in this recent time.
Orders.
Yeah, let's hide those again.
Awesome. So before we jump into the Q&A section, feel free to reach out, stay connected with us. We actively monitor our email, justiceinjuneofficial@gmail.com. So if you're ever interested in having a conversation like this in a different sphere, absolutely can reach out. If you come across a great resource, anything and everything, shoot it our way. You can also follow us on social media, Instagram and Twitter. Our Instagram is a little bit more active at Justice in June. We're sharing a lot of content around Black History Month this month, so that's a great way to stay informed, easy shareable graphics, and then of course our site justiceinjune.org. And then feel free to follow either of us personally as we live our personal lives, but we also infuse Justice in June into everything we do.
Right, and with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing, and we're open for question and answer time. That was weird. I've never said the full phrase, question and answer, so that felt weird coming out of my mouth. Q&A.
I have a question. And I would love to hear your perspective on this. I actually had somebody call me out for sharing Gap Year Exploration Month and saying that it was sort of taking away from Black History Month. And I felt very frustrated with that. And we had an interesting conversation about the whole thing, but I feel like you can celebrate multiple things at one time. And I feel like this event is such a great example of that, of how you can talk about how to advance, racial equality during your gap year, and how both things can be celebrated. What kind of recommendations would you have in terms of that kind of maybe challenge that can be raised?
Yeah, I can jump in here. It's really important, one, that you can never highlight enough things. It's important to have focuses, but I'll give an example. February is obviously Black History Month, but Chinese New Year, also known as Lunar New Year, also falls into that, right? This is a great way to bring awareness, especially as a lot of people are becoming more culturally aware of like, how can maybe I really want to celebrate something, but I want to do it right. So on our company, we are highlighting Lunar New Year, and we made sure and aligned our leadership with our IDC of like, how can we do this in the right way? How can we make a spotlight for both? And there's absolutely always a way. And so Gap Year Exploration Month is a great way to do that as well. And that's where intersectionality comes into place. We don't always just fit into these 1, 2, 3 boxes, right? There's different parts of us that infuse how we walk through life, and it's absolutely okay to highlight that. And it's easy to do without drawing away from something else, right? It's mixing it in. And that's how allyship works too. We can't always, when you choose to be an ally, the hope is that you don't pick and choose what you want to speak up for, right? When there's injustice, you bring light to that, even if something else has the focus at the time. And there will be times to step back and say, hey, this is when we're focusing on this, but things can live in tandem. So don't be discouraged. I think that's a great opportunity to have a conversation of like, hey, you know what? We can celebrate more than one thing, and this is how I'm doing it.
And just to tack on a little bit, I think something that was really cool about June this past year too, was that is also traditionally a celebratory month or Pride Month for a lot of folks. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, sometimes this is maybe where I could see some disagreement happening, because each person will have a different nuance to when something might take a priority or bigger focus. Not that any one thing's more important or less important, but one may just be at the forefront. And again, I think there was a lot of momentum around racial justice and social justice in that sense. And I didn't really see many folks being like, oh, but it's Pride Month. Like, that's taking away from other people being recognized. So to Bree's point too, maybe we as a society do a better job of highlighting intersectionality, and that it's not one or the other, like 1 + 1 or 1 - 1, but it could be 1 × 1. So yeah, there's still gonna be a moment where I hate second guessing myself. So you probably are still like, okay, like, am I taking away from something else? Like, I'm not trying to be part of that problem. But I think maybe for that person that did reach out, they just maybe you could expand their horizon or their perspective on what both of those things can look like. Or like Bree said, you would just invite them to the session. Say like, well, look at this beautiful combination of intersectionality.
No, I think that's a great point in terms of, I mean, highlighting intersectionality as a whole. I mean, we can definitely do more to talk about that in general. So thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? We are open.
I got one. Hey, all, I'm Allison. Thanks so much for your really creative presentation. I just really appreciate the interactivity of it. And it got me thinking about facilitating these types of conversations in virtual spaces, and also like amidst, gosh, I don't feel like I can't find resources right now. It's like so many things, like read to this article and then go here and then do this and then follow that. And so I was just wondering, like if you can speak to any experience of overwhelm. I really appreciated your tangible tools for, self-directed accountability, like having a buddy or having like structure around timing, like 10 minutes a day versus 25 minutes a day. Like, do you have any other insight on facilitating these types of conversations for people who like might have their motivation or their creativity sort of snuffed by all of the overwhelming resources available?
Yeah. Autumn, did you want to hop on this one?
I can definitely speak to that because I don't know, I for sure have experienced it, and because I'm like how I am, I always want to feel that I call it my full circle, like coming full circle to understand something, where I like start and I'm like, oh, I know this 100%. I have completely mastered the thing. And as hard as this is to say, I think there's one effect of understanding for yourself, like you're never going to master all the things. And that's the beauty. And like for me, the terror of the internet is like, I could learn so much more than I currently know. And the more that I know, the more I realize I don't know. And that's really frustrating for someone who likes to master things. So for me, I really just had to reframe. And I was like, okay, if I do one thing, and that for me, it's helpful to have just the one thing. So I would caution not getting to like, oh, I checked my box, but just saying I can be proud of myself at the end of the day because I have tried to progress my needle forward. And when I reframed it for myself of, am I proud of myself at the end of the day? Because I tried to show up or I tried to be in this space in XYZ thing, that really helped. That helped my mental health and not feeling bad. Like I just felt bad about not doing enough, even though I was doing the most that I could with my limited time or the constraints I already had in place. Then the second thing I would say is that's where I would start. But then as a person that does like to optimize, also look at, is the one thing you're picking, or the daily progress, the micro progress, something that is impactful beyond you as an individual? So I would say ultimately, yes, whatever you do, your perspective, the conversations you're doing, the shoulders you're rubbing metaphorically in these COVID times are always going to help. Like if you're learning more, that's going to help you bring wisdom to any of those interactions. But there's also something to be said for, am I the limiting factor? Like, is there a way that the work I'm doing, whatever I choose, is it also able to scale, or can it impact others? Or am I using my 10, 25, 45 minutes a day to, like Bree mentioned, like partner along or amplify efforts that are already being made? And I think that's where I'm able to be at now, because that interests me more. I'm like, okay, I know that I can work on myself, and I know that any difference I'm making is still good, but I think there is a little bit of nuance in what effort you're putting in and how that effort can be more fruitful or rewarding beyond you as an individual. So that's how I would approach it, or how I'm trying to approach it currently. We will see. Time will tell if that's a good approach. So far, it's been working.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys both so much. This is just so well put together, and I'm just so appreciative of you taking the time to be here with us. I have a question. I teach in a program, Seguin Land Institute, and this past fall, my course was also in response to the rising tide of Black Lives Matter activism. I called it like Radical Love for the New 21st Century. And we had some great textbooks One of them was called See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur that students really loved. And we had a grand, experiment really trying to break down the role of rage and grief and safe containers and all of these things. But at the end, there were still so many lingering questions, and much of what you've presented kind of gives a path, I think, to following those questions. But I'm hoping to hear if you have any thoughts on how to engage conversations that go beyond your like bubble. Like our cohort was really practicing deep listening, multiple perspective taking within their cohort. But by and large, we did have some small economic diversity, a small amount of racial diversity, but by and large, they were all in the same life stage, having the very similar experience with us on the coast of Maine. And they want to know how to bring this back into broader like worlds. And you've laid out a pathway in terms of like, maybe you could do the policy, or maybe you volunteer your time with an organization. But I would just love to hear more on like tangible interpersonal relationship skills that go beyond your like bubble.
Yeah.
If you have any.
No, it's a really good point. At first, it starts with recognizing and being able to acknowledge, do I have a diverse circle to begin with, right? Are my relationships that I have dynamic, right? Autumn and I build off of each other. And while we think similarly in some aspects, we are able to also challenge each other and are informed by different lived experiences that allow us to bring different nuances to certain conversations and how we think about the perception of things. And so we were lucky enough to obviously go to somewhere like USC, where that really opened up the types of engagements we were having. But it starts with also, am I creating an inclusive environment? Am I always gravitating towards the people in the room who something about them feels similar to me? And that's the comfortable way to do it. We all want to go and be like, okay, let me figure out someone who it's going to be good if I go and step into here, and it's going to feel okay, and it's not going to, push me to challenge myself and how I'm interacting. And that's great for our own personal, feeling. But sometimes pushing ourselves to gravitate towards the people maybe we're not going to in the first place. And then looking at in our own, I would say, personal, professional, maybe even academic spheres of, are there people in there who have maybe exactly different experiences? And how can I find a common area and just start a conversation there, right? Figure out what they're involved in, right? Is there some way to partner? And I'll use an example of, right, I work in the beauty space. I'm a brand manager for a hair product company. And so we work with stylists. Stylists have different skill sets. And so a lot of people in the stylist community, hairdresser community, have a lack in what they're exposed to at the cosmetology level. And so if you don't know about a certain technique on different textures and types of hair, you're automatically limiting who you are even exposed to and who you can cater to. And that means going and how do you get into that space to figure it out? How do you build your skill set so that you can cater to those people in the first place? So that's a, more professional version of that, but it takes really challenging and thinking about what spaces am I existing in, and where is there other places that maybe I can find value in and bring value to, and just start from there.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about is for some of our students, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into multiple perspective taking when you're already having, to carry particular weight of injustice or oppression. And then for some of our other students, the question was really like, how do you put yourself in a position of listening and following other leaders? And then also, this kind of speaks to Erin's kind of challenge that she presented, like, how do you do this calling in versus calling out? And I'm just really interested in that. And if there's any good readings you guys have about that and like actual like steps or something, I'd love to hear more and learn more.
I think Meg in general, I can kind of speak to this a little bit more because So maybe I'm interpreting the question from the perspective of if you just don't have that, like you've never had that kind of group, how do you get into that kind of, or not group, that was maybe a poor noun, but access to that space, that type of perspective. And or you're already like, if you're already kind of unpacking things, and then it's still hard to be vulnerable and to be in a space where you're like, oh, I am being challenged in a belief by someone kind of directly or in a conversation. So for me, I grew up in a 99.9% white community in rural Missouri, rural northern Missouri. I was literally the only person of color that I knew, except for 2 other students in my entire K through 12 experience. So a lot of my, like it's interesting now looking back and then moving to LA for a few years where I was like, wow, I didn't know how to talk to other Indian people. I was like, I can't relate to this culture. Like my mother is white. So while I have some of my heritage and some of that knowledge, I also am just missing like a big chunk from how I grew up with how my cultural identity was developed. And so I think getting people just being super comfortable, first of all, with being uncomfortable. Because I was just forced into that environment where Brianna was my immediate roommate. So when her 7 foot, he's not 7 feet, but it seems like that, her tall Jamaican dad was the first person I met, like towering in our doorway. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like I just felt so many things were unknown. Building familiarity builds comfort. So if there is just opportunity to expose yourself in ways, I mean, utilizing, like, I don't know, the first thing that came to mind was just getting comfortable with the language and the cultures of other spaces. And that, I think one of the easiest ways to consume that is through film, through documentaries, through TV shows, through something like that. Netflix has tried really hard, I think, to start telling other stories. For example, is it Never Have I Ever? That was the show. Yes, I got it. Never Have I Ever was the first time I ever saw someone use the pet names that my grandmother used with me on film. And I like cried, even though it's about a high school girl. And I was like, I can't relate to these insecurities. That's not true. Sometimes you can. But I was still like, whoa, this was really emotionally impacting because I didn't know that I had never seen that on screen and never seen that talked about by a certain friend group. So I think one step would be getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, doing that through increasing familiarity, even if that's not an experience. Like that was never an experience I had at home. So I did have to seek it out, and that might have to be done digitally right now to seek those out. And then second, with that, I think you just have to know for yourself too, like being better able to say, okay, when I was trying to have this conversation, this was the part that I had to unplug or that I but became desensitized. So figuring out whatever that thing was and trying to connect it to whatever that internal reason was. Because I think sometimes it might be a deeper insecurity, or it might be, oh, that's too hard for me to unpack right now because I'm still stuck in guilt and shame instead of in recognition and acknowledgement. And guilt and shame aren't going to get you anywhere because they just hold you down and they just make you feel bad. But recognition and acknowledgement allow you to kind of move forward in it, or at least have some wiggle room of, I'm not a bad person. I might have incorrect ideas, or I might just not have exposure yet to these other ways of thinking. So that would be kind of how I'm trying to tackle it. But yeah, Meg, if you want to send those along too, I think all of us are trying to learn how to be better learners, be better conversationalists, so that we don't take things as personally, and it's more just a growth conversation society piece, not a, wow, I'm a bad person feeling.
Thank you guys so much. When I mentioned the emotional layer, I was talking about our students of color were saying, like, I don't want to have to take this on when I'm already have so much. And then that was an invitation for other students to step in more of that discomfort. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Awesome.
I think we can, unless there's any other burning Q&As, I'm happy to stay on. So I'm not trying to close this off at any means, but we did say it would just go for an hour. But Autumn and Brianna, I don't know what your schedules are like. I know you do have so many projects going on and are incredible. So, so I'll do a formal close now. And if anybody wants to stay on, I'm going to keep the Zoom room open. But just a huge thank you to you, Autumn and Brianna, for showing up continually for Gap Year Association. They're doing this out of the kindness of their hearts to join us tonight. So we really appreciate it. And I hope we can continue to engage with the two of you in conversations for our our sphere. I don't know how else to say that, but thank you both for joining us, and thanks for everyone else for joining us tonight.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. Thank you for letting us utilize our lane. We're rejuvenated.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
So maybe it's secretly selfish. We're like, yes, another opportunity to feel fulfilled.
Who was the quote by that was time under intensity leads to growth?
Pastor Stephen Furtick of Elevation Church. He has, and whether you're, Christian or not, he does have a podcast. He does his sermons and podcasts on Spotify, and just there's good life gems in there. So
Good mindset. For me, I use a lot of them too, even just like as mindset growth things. They help me give different perspective to the things that normally like, oh, this is so big and hard. And I'm like, oh, I never thought of it this way. So he does good mindset shifts. But yeah, time under tension results in growth.
Yeah, it's a great quote. Great quote. It looks like Angela has a question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really helpful. I am a sophomore in college right now. So it was really, really helpful to see like people who have had like a little bit more experience in the activism space share like, I think, very practical advice. So my question is kind of towards you guys specifically, a little bit more in my opinion. So I think it's about integrating activism into a longer term like career path. So you guys started the organization, I think like last year or like the year before. Oh, last year. Okay. And I like you already talked a little bit about this about what's happening in June and all that, but I guess there must have was there something that made you be like, I do want to commit to activism being like working on activism being a bigger part of my life, and I want to take this integrate this into my longer career plan. I guess where I'm coming from is I'm at a point where I'm choosing careers and I'm like thinking about going into finance, which is like not like activism related, and but at the same time I'm extremely passionate about like policy, government, activism and all that, but I like those would be not overlapping, and sometimes you do have to like sacrifice one to get the other. And so was there a moment where you kind of realized that you wanted to take this further, and what inspired you?
Yeah, so I'll make one point and then give you two tips. One, we got very blessed and lucky to just, this fell into, our hands were open and it fell into it, and we took the reins and ran with it. We were inspired by the amount of people that saw this and utilized it as a resource. If it hadn't taken off, I'm sure we would have still utilized our voice, but we would not have had this incredible platform. So for us, it was, people are committing to doing the work. We're going to commit to continuing to build out tools and resources and amplifying this conversation and connecting people where we can. For me, I was a business student, so I totally get the whole finance corporate life that you're considering. I also got lucky enough to work for a company that is invested in championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would say, if you want to, because it's important, right? You're going to come out of college and you're going to want to make money and be able to support yourself. Look at companies and ask them those questions in those interviews. What are you doing to champion DE&I, right? Do you have established councils, right? Do you have something, a consulting or something where you're making sure that there's representation, that there's an inclusive environment? How do you handle the escalation process if there is an issue? All of that, and they should have answers, and you will be able to tell if there's not something substantial there. So that's my tip number one, is really think about that if you want to stay in the scope of, kind of what your study is, but also think about, there's avenues to almost utilize activism as a career. Diversity, equity, inclusion is spiking right now, and there are roles within consulting, roles within existing companies and corporations across different industries, whether that's tech, whether that's beauty, whether that's business, and so on, where you can be in that industry because you work for that company, but you're working on diversity, equity, inclusion, or you're working on corporate social responsibility, right? So that is a good way to kind of merge that. But also, if you take a full-time role, there's absolutely volunteer opportunities. There's organizations that people are involved in where they have full-time jobs. Some people have families, but they're still able once a month or however, a few events here to be able to get involved. So you test the waters, maybe look, and also it's going to depend on where you live, right? Obviously, LA, metropolitan cities, probably going to have way more opportunities than somewhere that's rural or even more suburban. So, but that's the beauty of also living in the internet age, right? Is now you can be connected anywhere at any time. So location won't necessarily hinder you. So really just think about that, ask those questions, and you can do your research in companies as well. If they're doing it right, it should be public and you should be able to get statistics or even do your research and come with the questions of, oh, I noticed you guys have this KPI. How are you tracking towards it, right? Put that pressure on, because at the end of the day, you want to be somewhere that's choosing to champion that and allowing you to kind of open up in that space.
And if I could just add on to that too. So I changed my major 3 times. It also took me 5 years to get through undergrad. So first of all, don't feel bad about that. Second of all, any job that pays your bills is honorable. There is honor in doing good work, no matter what field you're in. So I don't know. I feel like people sometimes feel shame for whatever they're doing. Any job that pays your bills is honorable. So feel that, or like at least know that. And the thing that kind of freed me from this, like, success route, or one that's a little more unsure, and like the Robert Frost at Angela, take the road less traveled. So I am teaching. My degrees are in neither. I actually am a geospatial analyst. Like, that's what my degree is in. I want to use that eventually. Also, I just need to check that box. My father can be like, you tried. I'm like, yes, I tried out the degree that I actually graduated with. But for me, I thought about 2 things. First, a professor told me, Autumn, stop stressing. Think about sequences of your life. Think about this chunk of time. You're going to try one thing and you'll really know, I like this, I don't like it. And I tried to do that in college. So you're also young in it. You could do some internships or message a professor in a certain lab you want to work on or work in. And that's how I learned. I was like, wow, I really hate researching about animals. Like, I was a terrible research assistant. I could not find motivation to do that. Even though I have a good work ethic, I was like, this is not for me. So you'll know what you like or what you don't like. The second thing is, without thinking about sequencing, you always have like the fun playtime. So I always thought of that as what I told Diana earlier, like my side hustles, my full-time hobby things are what I might use to explore. And then if that can grow into something that can pay my bills, awesome. But if it can't, then I'm still fulfilled knowing I get to use my time or talent and energy in that space. So I would say, if you're questioning, or if there are, like, you want to be savvy as well, if there are debts you need to pay or other things you need to take care of, it makes sense. It is honorable to pick a job that you know you can support yourself from. But you always have options in transferring out of that role. You always have that play free time after work ends. And like Bree said, a lot of corporations have millions of dollars earmarked now for DE&I, and they have no idea how to spend it. So you could merge both of those real quick by being like, here's a good way, here's an impactful way, here's a positive way for your customers to see you impacting this movement using your corporate social responsibility. So that could be, I'm sure they would be excited to see someone who can take both of those spheres and overlap them and be like, here you go, and also hire me and I can do that for your company. So I think there's a lot of flexibility with finance.
Yeah, reach out to us if you have more questions. We live and breathe network, so there are definitely people that we could probably put you in touch with.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Of course.
I think Julia has a quick question, if you guys are okay with sticking out a few more minutes.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Hey guys, so nice to see you. This has been such a wonderful, you guys are always such great presenters. So my question is, like, I feel like we talk a lot about like how to react as an ally in situations where you observe like a microaggression going on or just something that makes you cringe. It occurred to me that like there have been times where I have been like the person who is microaggressing unintentionally. And I have to say that like when those things have happened, and I think that they've gotten less over time, especially as I've become more aware, but like I'm filled with guilt for a very long time if I realize I've done it. And I'm curious, and like I guess I'm curious to hear from you guys, like, what is the best route when you realize either in the moment or shortly after that, like something you've said may have become a microaggression, and maybe it's not that big of a deal, but it's, I think part of the guilt comes from knowing that it's part of this like culminating like stress that you're putting on someone else. So yeah, any tips on how to proactively temper that? Or I mean, obviously, you know, not to microaggress, but I mean, like if it's been done, if the deed has been done and you want to like undo it or do it at least amount of damage, if you have any advice.
I think the first step is owning it, right? Taking a responsibility of like, I recognize that I was in the wrong. And time and place. So if that's something that happens in a group, you can have a quick apology there or recognize it, but also take time to, if whether it's a certain group or a person, to just be on the side and be like, hey, you know what? I realized and it honestly, it doesn't even matter how far back it was. If you really still feel guilty about that one scenario and you know that you're still somewhat in contact or could reach that person, you don't know how impactful it could be to know that you came full circle. And they may never have thought about it again, because people who frequently get microaggressions move on with their lives because that's what we need to do. But taking responsibility and saying not just sorry, but I realized where I was wrong. And I realized that my actions either made you uncomfortable, unsafe, or insecure. And I apologize for contributing to that. And I hope to do better. And feel free also to call me out in the future if you see it happening again, because that opens up and says, hey, I understand that I'm wrong, but I'm also open to criticism. Because a lot of where there's two divergent paths is the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, oh my gosh, virtue signaling, I'm one of the good ones and I just messed up. And then there's the I'm taking responsibility and I want to get better, even if it's not comfortable for me. And that is the way that you can create a more inclusive environment and just be a more inclusive person. I know it doesn't matter what your identity is. You can still say something that's out of pocket and offhand, and just taking that time and saying, okay, well, now also I'm going to go learn about how I can like avoid that in the future more deeply, and how and what is that, how does that resonate with someone else. So definitely just responsibility, right? And then that apology, right? And then doing the work to reroute, to fix it, and to create a more positive space.
And I have a quick story. I have several students. So something that I didn't grow up with, but I have had to now learn, is asking people for their preferred pronouns. And so I have had several students who have let me know and have used their assertiveness to say, hey, actually, Ms. G, I would prefer you use these pronouns for me instead of the ones that I defaulted to. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So I apologize. I owned it. And I have 180 students. And for 7 months, I've been calling them by the wrong pronouns, or they've recently had a more clarification around that piece of identity for them. So I told them I addressed it. I made sure they felt comfortable talking to me about it, because initially one student in particular didn't say anything, had told all their other teachers they prefer this. And I heard it from another teacher and I was like, did the student not feel comfortable approaching me? Like, what was it that was holding them back? And so we just were able to have a quick touch point, and I was like, cool, we can move on, we're fine. And so addressing it, making sure they feel comfortable, and the other thing that I found too that's made me feel a little bit better about things is just, like Bree said, making new mistakes. So whatever the first one was, do whatever you need to on your own education, learning, unlearning, and then make a new mistake, because we are all always going to like microaggress. It's just really hard living in the society we do where that's not gonna happen. But my goal is like, okay, cool, I don't want to repeat something that I've already done. I'm gonna try to do not try, that's a bad word. I'm gonna do my best to not repeat. I know it's gonna happen again. I know I'm gonna have to own it, but if I don't repeat, I know I'm getting better. And if people can tell you, that's like a great sign. So maybe initially, like, oh my gosh, everyone is letting me know that I keep slipping up on this pronoun use. But I think, I don't know, I had to shift my perspective on that, because my students were comfortable enough. Say, hey, Ms. G, remember it's they, it's not she. And I was like, yes, you're right, it is. And so then I would show that I wasn't bothered or too uncomfortable too, because I think for probably, speaking from my own experience and as a woman of color, when people get like awkward about it, I'm like, why did I even point it out? Like, I don't want to feel awkward because your awkwardness is making me feel awkward. So keeping it casual without, like Bree said, being too flippant, which is a weird gray area. So then making new mistakes there is what I would recommend.
Awesome.
Great
Awesome.
question, Julia. I was going to ask something similar, but I'm not going to take everyone's time, just around like I think something I've actually distanced myself lately from social media because of frustration with a lot of performative posts, and just feeling like I know like friends or others who are not engaged in this work, but they're posting just to show that they're engaged, but they're not really doing that much, and or whatever it might be. And so it became this very frustrating thing of like, well, what are you actually doing? And and social media to me is a very confusing space in that way, because it sometimes feels like a competition of like who is engaging the most via social media, but what are they actually doing in the rest of the time? So I think it's a similar, it's like the flip side of what Julia's question was in some ways, of like how to address people who maybe are trying, but trying just to show that they're trying and not necessarily actually making a dent.
I have to hop off, but I will answer this one really quickly. We are under the kind of perception that any type of awareness is still awareness.
Yeah.
Someone posts to a certain extent, if someone posts, if even one person's idea is changed or challenged, that is worth it. However, seeing that, and if you have a feeling it's probably informative, is a great way to pull someone into that conversation of literally asking, oh my gosh, I saw that you posted this, do you have more information, or what are you doing to learn more about this? I'll give a really quick example. Is I have friends who are part of the Jewish community as well as the Armenian community, and there was a lot of there's always anti-Semitism, but there was an uptick during, I would say, like early fall, and that is a group that commonly feels silenced because it's happening all the time, and it becomes trivialized. So I took the time to learn, and then bring awareness, and then make sure that when people are asking, I also donated. And I asked first to a friend, and I said, hey, I want to donate to organizations that are furthering awareness around this. Where would you recommend, right? So I'm not asking her for the education piece, but I'm asking for the, like Autumn did, right? Verifying that this is something that you would actually, recommend. And that allowed me to reroute my resources, my time, my energy to something that was more efficient. So that's a great way of just asking people, and if they get weird about it and they shy away from it, that's their own issue to deal with. But at least you took the opportunity to try and pull them into it. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you both again, and have a wonderful evening, afternoon, wherever you are across the globe. And hopefully we'll do this again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.